The wind outside was calm that afternoon, but inside the minds of investigators in Olmsted Township, Ohio, a storm was about to break. Before we go any further, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here and you love gripping true crime stories told with the detail and emotion they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming, because today's case is one that will sit heavy on your heart and haunt you long after the video ends. Picture this: a quiet neighborhood where people know each other's names, where strangers stand out, and where an unusual sight immediately raises suspicion. It's the kind of place where a barking dog or a strange car can set the phone lines buzzing. But what happened here shattered that small town sense of safety forever. It began with a phone call, a strange, uneasy report that something was floating in a retention pond. At first, the description was almost surreal. "It could be a mannequin," the caller said. But seasoned officers know better. Mannequins don't turn up in ponds, and they certainly don't carry the kind of weight that settles into the pit of your stomach when you hear the words, "You'd better come take a look." Detective Scott Sonneborn still remembers that day, like it was carved into the back of his mind. Just months into his new role in the Detective Bureau, his career in investigations was still young. He had started in dispatch, working the radios, sending units into the unknown. But nothing in his past prepared him for what he was about to see. When Sonneborn arrived, the fire department was already there, their long poles skimming the water, pulling the object slowly toward the muddy shore. And as the shape became clearer, the grim truth emerged. This was no mannequin. This was a body. The first homicide case Sonneborn would ever work, and it wasn't just any killing. It was something darker, something personal. The victim's body, partially clothed, was tangled with ropes. No pants, only a shirt and black jacket. Male genitalia, but 3 bras layered over the chest. A clue that hinted at identity, at life choices, at the truth of who this person was. The skin showed signs of decomposition. They'd been here for a while, and yet in the stillness of the scene, every detail felt urgent. Lieutenant Matthew Vano, a veteran of 25 years in law enforcement, stood nearby, his eyes scanning every inch. To him, the ropes, knotted at the back, not tied to anything, were strange. Pointless unless they meant something more sinister. The air carried that heavy stillness investigators know too well. Every murder scene is a puzzle, but this one seemed to have been assembled deliberately to hide its image. The body was moved with care, zipped into a bag, lifted up the incline. Sonneborn knew that from here, the real work began. Someone had taken this life violently, stabbed over 40 times. 40. Not the work of someone afraid or desperate, but of someone enraged. Someone determined to erase the very existence of their victim. Dr. Andrea Wyss, the forensic pathologist assigned to the case, had seen death in all its forms. But she approached each autopsy with the same quiet vow: to be the voice for the voiceless. The body told its story in silence. Clustered stab wounds to the head, neck, shoulders, and chest. Sharp force injuries so numerous they painted a picture of unrestrained brutality. And then came another detail, one that stopped the room cold. The victim, later identified as 20-year-old CeCe Dove, was a transgender woman. For those who live in the transgender community, violence isn't a distant fear, it's a shadow that follows them. Statistics show higher rates of assault, harassment, and even murder. And now, here was another name to add to that grim list. Detectives felt the weight of it immediately. CeCe's death wasn't just about one victim. It was about a life cut short because someone couldn't accept her for who she was. The urgency was doubled. Find the killer, and fast. They canvassed the area, knocking on doors, searching for anyone who might have seen or heard something. The property where CeCe's body was found was large, scattered with trees, debris, even an old fire pit surrounded by car seats. It felt less like a backyard and more like a place where things, and perhaps secrets, were dumped. And then, a potential lead. A pair of swim trunks half hidden in overgrown grass. CeCe had been found without pants. Could these belong to her? The trunks went straight to the lab. But as the investigation pushed forward, the most chilling discovery came not from the trunks, but from inside CeCe's skull. During the autopsy, Dr. Wyss found something embedded in the bone. A small, flat piece of metal. It was the tip of a knife, broken off during the attack and lodged in her skull. In her career, she had never seen anything quite like it. It told her everything she needed to know about the ferocity of the killing. Still, the murder weapon itself was missing. A sheath was found and even a broken hilt from a paring knife, but no blade. The pond was searched with sonar, but the EPA denied permission to drain it because of the chemical contamination in the water. Time was slipping away, but they did find something else beneath the murky surface. A yellow rope tied to both a cinder block and a lead pipe. The implication was clear. The killer had tried to weigh CeCe's body down to make sure she'd never surface. This was no crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. This was calculated, cold. The medical examiner estimated CeCe had been in the water for months, her body preserved in the winter chill. That meant she had been killed long before she was found in April. Her family had reported her missing in March, but she'd last been seen around Christmas. The timeline stretched like a shadow, and somewhere inside it, the killer was hiding. Detectives put out a media release. Calls came in, not just from other police departments, but from people in the transgender community. "We think it's CeCe," they said. DNA confirmed it. The news was devastating. To know who killed her, detectives needed to know who CeCe was. She was young, beautiful, unapologetically herself. She had only recently begun living openly as a woman. Her mother didn't approve, but some family members remained close. Like many in her situation, she had moments of drifting in and out of home life, disappearing for months at a time. She was also active on dating sites, something that could open the door to danger, and that's exactly what detectives feared. One call stood out, a 911 report from a man named Jeffrey Bland, who claimed to have spotted the body in the pond. But his story didn't sit right. Why call your boss first instead of the police? Why seem so hesitant? Bland had warrants out for his arrest, another reason to avoid law enforcement. But could there be more to it? Could the man who found CeCe have put her there? As the camera in our minds lingers on that question, we're left wondering, was the killer already standing at the scene watching her body pulled from the water? Or was someone else moving the pieces from the shadows? And that's where the next chapter of this story begins. Because the trail of clues was about to lead detectives into an even darker corner of this quiet town. Detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Jeffrey Bland's involvement was deeper than he was admitting. On paper, he was just the man who spotted something in the water. But in a homicide, especially one this violent, chance discoveries are rarely innocent. Still, to accuse someone, you need more than a gut feeling. You need a chain of evidence that wraps around them so tightly they can't wriggle free. They began retracing Bland's life in the months leading up to CeCe's disappearance. They learned he had moved into the apartment near the pond in mid-February, 2 months after the medical examiner believed CeCe had likely been killed. If that timeline held, Bland might not have even been living there when her body went into the water. That meant the killer could be someone else entirely. This lead, as promising as it seemed at first, was slipping through their fingers. But just when they thought they'd hit a dead end, a small detail cracked the door open again. A taxi ride. During interviews, a neighbor mentioned seeing taxi cabs arrive at the property at odd hours, sometimes around 3 in the morning. She didn't know who was inside, but she saw the pattern often enough to remember. That was enough for detectives to start calling cab companies, asking for logs, GPS records, and recordings of dispatch calls. The breakthrough came quickly. One dispatch recording from January 5th sent chills through the room. A man's voice ordered a cab to pick up a female passenger at an address in Cleveland, CeCe's address, and bring her straight to the very property where her body would later be found. It was a direct connection between CeCe and the location of the murder. The cab driver's log showed the trip was completed, the passenger dropped off, and the fare paid in cash by a man waiting outside. The description? A tall black male, someone who matched not Jeffrey Bland, but another name that was about to come into sharp focus, Andre Bridges. The address where CeCe had been dropped off belonged on paper to a man named Jason Quinones, but Quinones didn't live there anymore. He had sublet the place to his old friend Andre, a man who had fallen on hard times and needed somewhere to stay. Andre agreed to pay rent in cash, and by all accounts, he had the run of the apartment. When detectives tracked down Quinones, he told them a story that sounded like it had been pulled from a crime thriller. He recalled going to the apartment in early January to collect rent. Andre had been standing outside near a fire pit, bleeding from his hand, looking wild-eyed. He claimed he'd been jumped by a couple of guys inside the apartment, one of whom had a knife. But when Quinones tried to go inside, Andre warned him not to. "You're not going to be happy with what you see," he said. Ignoring the warning, Quinones stepped inside and saw blood, more than you'd expect from a simple cut. Meanwhile, his friend Bill King, who had come along for the ride, took out his phone and snapped a photo of Andre standing by the fire pit, bleeding hand and all. That photo would later be time-stamped January 5th, around 3 p.m. The very day CeCe was last known to be alive. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Detectives now had CeCe arriving at the apartment that morning, Andre bleeding and burning something outside that afternoon, and her body in the pond not far away. The circle was closing. But the real test came when they brought Andre in for questioning. He sat down, almost eager to talk, as if he could explain it all away. He claimed Bill King had been the one to arrange for a woman to come over. He even admitted to hearing a scream from inside the apartment. But in his version, when he opened the door, he saw Bill holding a knife, and Jason standing nearby, both saying, "It's a dude! It's a dude!" As if CeCe's transgender identity had somehow triggered what happened next. Andre insisted he left immediately, distancing himself from the violence. The problem? His story didn't match the evidence or the timeline. And detectives knew that when a suspect starts telling stories that shift the blame but still put them at the scene, they're revealing more than they realize. That's when a new piece of evidence came into play. A bill from Metro Health Hospital for treatment on January 6th, the day after CeCe was killed. The injury? A deep cut to Andre's right hand. He told medical staff it was from a can of vegetables. But investigators had seen this kind of wound before, often on the hands of people who stab with such force that their grip slips, slicing their own palm on the blade. Forensic pathologist Dr. Wiss confirmed it was entirely plausible. In a frenzy of over 40 stab wounds, such an injury was almost inevitable. Still, the police needed one more link, something that tied CeCe physically to that apartment. A search of the residence revealed faint blood spatter on the stairwell walls, mostly cleaned, but still visible to trained eyes. More telling were the ropes found in the garage, ropes that matched exactly those tied around CeCe's body and the ones attached to the cinder block in the pond. But the clincher came from a single drop of blood found on a heater in the bedroom. It was CeCe's. That tiny spot was the smoking gun that proved she had been inside the apartment and injured there. From there, the narrative became chillingly clear. On the morning of January 5th, Andre called for a cab to bring CeCe from Cleveland to Olmsted Township. She arrived, likely thinking she was going on a date, as she had many times before. At some point inside the apartment, things turned violent. Whether it was motivated by prejudice, rage, or some twisted combination of the two, Andre attacked, stabbing her again and again, 40 times in all. The injuries to her neck were especially severe, slicing through her thyroid cartilage and severing major blood vessels. Dr. Wiz couldn't say exactly how long she remained alive after the attack. Maybe minutes, maybe half an hour, but it was not instant. She suffered. After the killing, Andre tied ropes around her torso, attaching them to the cinder block and lead pipe. Under cover of darkness, he dragged her to the pond, pushing her into the icy water, certain she would sink and never be found. But killers always leave something behind. In this case, it was a knife tip lodged in CeCe's skull, a drop of her blood in the bedroom, and the memory of a neighbor who had seen those taxis late at night. When the trial came, the evidence spoke for itself. Andre Bridges was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. But the courtroom held a visual that said even more than the verdict. Andre sat alone. No friends, no family to stand behind him. On the other side, CeCe's family filled the benches, their presence a silent declaration of her worth, her humanity, and their love. For the detectives, it was justice, but not closure. Nothing could give CeCe back the life she had been building, the joy she had only just begun to claim. For the transgender community, it was another reminder of the dangers they face, simply for living authentically. And for everyone who worked the case, it became one of those memories that never truly fades. They had given CeCe a voice again, but the echo of her last moments still lingers, asking a question that remains as urgent now as it was on that cold January day. How many more? In the days after the verdict, the town tried to settle back into its quiet rhythm, but something had changed. Olmsted Township wasn't the same place it had been before January 5th, 2013. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked now looked twice at strangers. Parents kept a closer watch on their children. And beneath it all, there was a quiet, unspoken realization. Monsters don't always live in faraway cities. Sometimes they live across the street, behind drawn curtains, and their cruelty stays hidden until it spills out in the most unthinkable ways. For Detective Sonneborn, this case had left a mark. It wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about the kind of violence that tries to erase a person's identity. He had walked onto that scene months earlier, green in his role as a detective, unsure of what lay ahead. Now, after standing in the courtroom and watching justice land, he carried the weight of knowing exactly what hate looked like when it picked up a knife. Lieutenant Vano felt it too. In his 25 years on the job, he had seen homicides sparked by money, by jealousy, by revenge. But this one was different. It was rooted in something colder, more senseless. A deep, almost primitive hostility towards someone simply for being who they were. That, he said quietly to a colleague one evening, was the hardest thing to swallow. The photographs from the case file tell their own story. CeCe's smile, wide and radiant, framed by long hair she wore with pride. The fire pit where Andre stood that day, bleeding hand clutched close, smoke curling into the January air. The yellow rope pulled from the icy pond, its fibers stiff and slick from months underwater. Each image carried a piece of the truth, but also a reminder that truth often comes at a terrible cost. When the news of her death spread through Cleveland's LGBTQ+ community, the shock was immediate, but so was the fear. Friends recalled the way CeCe lit up a room, her infectious laugh, the way she could turn strangers into allies in the span of a conversation. She was bold, she was hopeful, and now she was gone. For many, it was a grim validation of the risks they lived with daily. Advocates spoke out, holding vigils, calling her name into the cold night air. They spoke not just of CeCe, but of a larger, relentless pattern. Transgender women, especially women of color, targeted and killed at disproportionate rates. The numbers were already staggering, and CeCe's murder was another name on a list that should never exist. Inside the police department, the case had also left its scars. Detectives often talk about carrying their victims. Memories of faces, crime scenes, even the smells of the places they've worked etched into their minds. For Sunnyborn, there would always be the moment when the divers pulled CeCe from the pond, the ropes cutting into her skin, the cold water dripping from her hair. For Dr. Wiss, there would always be the image of that knife tip embedded in bone, silent testimony to the violence she endured. But as much as the case was about the brutality of her death, it was also about the precision of the work that followed. Every single step, the cab company's dispatch logs, the timestamp on a blurry cell phone photo, the texture of a rope fiber under a microscope, had been part of a chain that finally brought Andre Bridges down. Without any one of those pieces, he might still be walking free. Looking back, it's almost eerie how easily the trail could have gone cold. If the neighbor hadn't mentioned the taxis, if the cab company hadn't kept its dispatch recordings, if the one drop of blood in the bedroom had been scrubbed away, the puzzle might never have been solved. And that's the unsettling reality of homicide investigations. Sometimes justice comes down to the smallest details, the kind that hinge on luck as much as skill. Even in victory, there's no celebration. For CeCe's family, hearing guilty didn't erase the months of fear when she was missing, or the moment they learned her body had been found. Her mother had filed the missing persons report herself, her voice heavy with worry, but even then she could not have imagined the truth. For the officers too, there was no fist pumping, no high fives, just quiet satisfaction that the right man would never harm another person again. And maybe somewhere in that silence, a hope that their work had sent a message, that in Olmsted Township, in Cleveland, in Ohio, you could not erase someone without the world noticing. The weeks after the trial brought a wave of reflection. News outlets covered the story from every angle. Some focused on the brutality of the crime, others on the dangers faced by the transgender community. Comment sections filled with arguments, condolences, and, tragically, the kind of ignorance and hatred that had fueled CeCe's murder in the first place. At a candlelight vigil held in her honor, friends shared memories that painted a portrait far brighter than the darkness of her final day. They spoke about her love for fashion, the way she'd walk into a room like it was a runway. They laughed through tears about the times she'd show up late, but make it worth the wait with her energy. And they spoke about her courage, how she had chosen to live openly, even knowing it made her a target. In that light, her murder became more than just a criminal case, it became a rallying point. Local advocates pushed harder for education, for protection, for visibility. "I can't keep losing my sisters," one woman said through tears at the vigil, her voice breaking but steady. Back at the department, the detectives moved on to other cases. But in the quiet moments, on long drives, in the stillness before sleep, CeCe's case returned. Sonnyborn would find himself replaying the investigation in his mind, wondering what might have happened if they'd found her sooner, if someone had been there to intervene. Vano, too, carried it. "It's one thing to solve a homicide," he said. "It's another thing when you know the homicide never should have happened in the first place." And then there was Dr. Wiss, whose work rarely intersected with the public side of justice. In the courtroom, she was calm and clinical, explaining the mechanics of CeCe's death. But outside, she knew the real weight of her role. She had been CeCe's final witness, the one to speak for her when no one else could. The file now sits in the archives, case numbers stamped neatly across the front, a stack of evidence logs and photos sealed away. But this isn't the kind of case that disappears into a drawer. It stays alive in the retelling, in the way it's whispered among other detectives, in the way CeCe's name comes up at community gatherings, in the way it's held as a reminder that every victim matters. When asked about it years later, One officer summed it up simply. She had love, that's what I remember most. Not just the violence, not just the crime scene. She had people who loved her, who stood for her, and that's more than her killer will ever have. Some stories end with a sense of closure. This one doesn't. It ends with a challenge. To see people for who they are, to protect them while they're alive, not just honor them when they're gone. It ends with the flicker of candlelight on a cold night, and the sound of voices calling a name into the darkness, refusing to let it fade. In the beginning, the case had been like staring into fog, shapes moving somewhere ahead but nothing clear enough to grab hold of. That first day at the pond, Detective Sonneborn knew they were starting at a disadvantage. Bodies found in water always meant lost evidence. Skin slippage erasing fingerprints, currents moving fibers or hair, insects and bacteria destroying trace material that might have been left behind. But the investigators leaned into the discipline that separates seasoned homicide teams from the rest. Patience. They didn't rush the puzzle. Instead, they studied each piece until it revealed something more. The cab company's dispatch logs were one of those moments where everything shifted. It wasn't just that they had the call on January 5th. It was the precision of the details. The address where CeCe was picked up, the cash payment at drop-off, the GPS trail that placed her squarely at Andre Bridges' doorstep. In a way, it was almost arrogant, as if Andre never considered that the very act of bringing her there would leave a breadcrumb that could be followed straight back to him. Still, breadcrumbs weren't enough. For the prosecutors to even consider a trial, the police needed an unbroken chain tying CeCe's last known moments to Andre's hands. That's where the forensics lab became their war room. The ropes from the pond went under high-powered comparison microscopes. Their frayed ends and twisted fibers matched against the coils found in Andre's garage. Even after months underwater, the rope from the pond retained enough structural integrity to be compared. The match was clear. The same manufacturer, the same weave pattern, the same distinctive yellow nylon. Then came the blood spatter on the stairwell. Under normal light, the walls looked clean. But when the forensic team swept through with luminol, faint constellations bloomed under the blue glow. Tiny arcs, droplets on opposite sides of the staircase. The kind of pattern that comes from a struggle in close quarters, not from someone cutting themselves on a soup can. But the most crucial find was microscopic. A drop of blood on the base of a plastic heater in the bedroom. To the naked eye, it looked like nothing. But DNA doesn't need to be visible to be damning. When the results came back, that single drop belonged to CeCe Dove. The weight of that discovery was enormous. Without it, the defense could have argued CeCe never entered the apartment. With it, the narrative became undeniable. She was there, she was injured there, and from there she never left alive. Meanwhile, detectives were also wrestling with the psychology of the case. Andre's account during interviews had been a strange mix of confession and deflection. He put himself at the scene, admitted to hearing a scream, even described seeing Bill King holding a knife. But his details shifted subtly each time, and when pressed, he'd pivot to claiming he wasn't there at the key moment. Detective Vano knew this tactic well. It was the half-truth defense. Give just enough honesty to appear cooperative, then twist the rest to plant doubt. But half-truths are fragile. The more Andre talked, the more the inconsistencies piled up. His injury was from vegetables, yet it perfectly fit the profile of a slip cut from stabbing. He didn't know CeCe, yet the taxi call that morning was placed from his phone. He claimed to leave before anything happened, yet his ropes were tied around her body. All these contradictions became the invisible threads binding him to the crime, and the detectives kept pulling until the knots tightened. At one point, there was talk about draining the pond to look for the missing murder weapon, a bold move that could have been the final nail in the coffin. But environmental regulations killed the idea. The pond had years of chemical runoff in it, and draining it would require permits they'd never get in time. Instead, they turned to sonar sweeps. The weapon never turned up, but what they did find was chilling enough. That length of rope, the cinder block, the lead pipe. Together they told a story of planning, of intent. The timeline became the investigators' backbone. January 5th morning, the cab picks CeCe up. Midday. She's dropped off at the apartment, greeted by Andre. That afternoon, a photo is taken of Andre at the fire pit, his hand wrapped in cloth, smoke rising as he burns something. Evening, neighbors see movement near the pond, and after that, nothing. Silence. The medical examiner's work filled in the brutal middle chapter. CeCe's injuries were not random. The pattern of stab wounds, clustered in the head, neck, and chest, suggested both rage and a focused intent to kill. The knife tip lodged in her skull spoke of force so violent it broke the weapon. Dr. Wiz explained in court how overkill often reveals the killer's state of mind. Not just wanting someone dead, but needing them obliterated. It's a frenzied violence often fueled by hatred or panic, and in this case, it was coupled with the calculated act of binding and submerging the body, ensuring it would disappear. Prosecutors loved details like that. Jurors could feel the weight of those words, picture the scene in their minds, and when the jury could see it, they could convict. Even as the case grew stronger, the detectives were careful not to let their guard down. They'd seen cases collapse before. Victims lose justice because of one procedural error. So they documented everything. Every door knocked on, every photo logged, every interview transcribed. They knew Andre's defense would attack the investigation itself, looking for cracks in the process, but there weren't any. The work was meticulous, and when the case finally went to trial, it unfolded like a tightly choreographed play. The cab dispatcher's call played aloud, the jurors hearing Andre's voice ordering the pickup. The photo of him by the fire pit was projected on the courtroom screen, timestamp glowing in the corner. The rope comparison was explained fiber by fiber. The drop of CeCe's blood linked conclusively to the apartment. And then there was the hospital bill. The quiet, almost mundane piece of paper that placed Andre in a hospital bed the day after the murder, getting stitches for a wound that fit perfectly with the attack. The defense tried to float alternate theories. Maybe Bill King had done it, maybe Jason Canonis. But the problem with smokescreens is that they dissolve under pressure. Neither Bill nor Jason had the taxi link, the injury, the ropes, or the DNA trail. Only Andre did. When the verdict came, guilty, there was no visible reaction from him, no outburst, no denial. He simply sat there, as if the weight of the sentence had already been pressing on him for months. For the jury, the decision was clear. For CeCe's family, it was the only measure of justice the law could offer. But for the detectives, the close of the trial was just the end of one chapter. The case would be entered into training files, dissected for lessons. How the taxi lead was developed, how rope fibers can survive months in water, how one drop of blood can close the gap between suspicion and proof. And yet, no matter how clinical the lessons became, there was no way to separate them from the human story underneath. This wasn't just about investigative skill. It was about the reality that without that skill, without those lucky breaks, Andre Bridges might have walked away. And CeCe Dove would have been just another unsolved name on a long, painful list. By the time the trial was over and the courthouse doors shut for the last time on this case, there was a strange stillness. For the first time in months, there were no press conferences, no frantic calls from the lab, no late-night stakeouts or urgent search warrants. Andre Bridges was locked away, sentenced to life in prison. The paperwork was filed. The case was officially closed. But closure is not the same as peace. Detective Scott Sonneborn would later say that even though they'd won, it didn't feel like a victory. You don't walk out of a case like this with a smile, he admitted quietly. You walk out knowing someone suffered, knowing they were terrified in those last moments, and you carry that with you. Lieutenant Vano had similar thoughts. In the quiet of his office after the verdict, he found himself replaying every step, not the investigation, but CeCe's life. The photos of her smiling, the way her friends described her energy, the fact that she had been building the courage to live openly as herself, and the fact that this courage had made her a target. The weight of that reality hit everyone involved. Because in the end, the case wasn't just about a murder. It was about what it means to live in a world where your very identity can put you in danger. In the months following the trial, the Cleveland LGBTQ+ community held gatherings in CeCe's honor. At one vigil, the crowd stood under the cold night sky, candles flickering in the wind, each flame a small act of defiance against the darkness. Friends shared memories, her love of bold colors, her quick wit, the way she could diffuse tension in a room with a single joke. Someone read aloud a message CeCe had once posted online. "I'm not here to fit into your world. I'm here to create my own." It was impossible not to feel the loss. For Dr. Andrea Wiss, the case had left its own mark. Her work was scientific, objective, measurements, analysis, cause, and manner of death. But she'd always believed that her job was more than numbers and diagrams. In court, she'd stood before the jury, explaining in calm, precise detail the injuries CeCe had suffered. But what stayed with her wasn't the anatomy. It was the voice she'd lent to someone who could no longer speak. "That's what we do," she said. "We become their voice." And sometimes that's the only justice they get. Even in prison, Andre Bridges remained an unrepentant figure. No apologies, no admissions, no letters to the family. Just a man whose hatred, or perhaps his fear, had been so great that it drove him to strip 40+ stab wounds into another human being. In a way, the emptiness of his reaction said more than any confession could. And then there was the fire pit. The photograph taken that January day, Andre, standing there with his bleeding hand, smoke curling upward, became one of the most haunting images in the case. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. The camera captured a moment in time, but not the smell of burning fabric, not the fear that must have hung in the air, not the silent knowledge in Andre's eyes that something irreversible had just happened. Detective Sunnyborn admitted he still sometimes thinks about that image at night. "It's not the blood, it's not even the crime scene," he said. "It's knowing that in that picture, he's already made the choice, and there's no taking it back." In the broader picture, CeCe's murder became another data point in a national crisis. Reports from advocacy groups showed that transgender women of color face homicide rates far higher than the general population. Many of these crimes go unsolved, either because the victims vanish into the cracks of the system or because their deaths don't get the same investigative resources. CeCe's case in that context was an exception, solved through a combination of relentless detective work, community input, and sheer luck. But luck is a dangerous thing to rely on. At one post-trial community meeting, an advocate stood up and said, "CeCe got justice because the right people happened to notice the right details at the right time. But justice shouldn't be luck. It should be the rule." The room fell silent, the truth settling heavy over everyone present. For the investigators, there was also a lesson in how fragile an investigation can be. If the cab company hadn't kept that dispatch recording, if the one drop of blood had been missed in the bedroom, if the rope fibers had degraded too much in the pond, the story could have ended differently. And that's what makes cases like this both satisfying and haunting for detectives. You're proud of the work, proud that you stood for someone who couldn't stand for themselves. But you're also painfully aware of how thin the line between justice and injustice really is. In the end, what remains is a kind of dual memory. On one side, there's the evidence, the crime scene photos, the lab reports, the testimony. On the other, there's CeCe as a person. The way her friends described her dancing, her fierce independence, her stubborn refusal to hide. Those two realities exist side by side, inseparable. When the video footage from the trial was archived, the final shot showed the judge reading the sentence, "Life in prison." The camera panned briefly toward the gallery, where CeCe's family sat, heads held high. You could see the exhaustion in their faces, the grief that no sentence could erase. But you could also see something else, the unspoken knowledge that CeCe's name would not fade quietly into a file folder. And that may be the most enduring victory of all. Because while the world will always have people like Andre Bridges, people who let prejudice curdle into violence, it will also have those who fight to expose them. Detectives who comb through hundreds of pages of cab logs, forensic teams who search for the match in a rope's twisted fibers, pathologists who speak for the dead when no one else can, and communities who refuse to let their fallen be forgotten. Years from now, someone will mention this case in a training session or at a conference on cold case methodology. They'll talk about the pond, the taxi call, the fire pit, the single drop of blood, and they'll talk about how those things, ordinary in isolation, became extraordinary when pieced together. But beyond the forensics, beyond the procedures, there's the human reminder, the reason anyone became a detective or a forensic pathologist or an advocate in the first place, that somewhere out there is another CeCe, living her life, vulnerable to the same dangers. And maybe if this story is told enough times, if the lessons are learned and the warning signs recognized, she won't meet the same fate. In the final analysis, CeCe Dove's murder was a crime meant to erase her, but it didn't. It made her name louder. It put her face into the news, her story into courtrooms, her memory into the hearts of people who never even met her. And in that way, even as her killer sits in a cell, CeCe continues to walk through the world, not as a victim, but as a reminder that no life is too small to fight for. And maybe that's what justice really is. Not a verdict, not a sentence, but the choice to remember. So the next time you hear of someone missing, someone whose life doesn't seem to matter to the headlines, think of CeCe. Think of the rope, the pond, the fire pit. Think of the way an entire chain of strangers, detectives, neighbors, cab drivers, scientists, came together to speak for her. And ask yourself, if her story found its way to you, what will you do with it? Because justice in the end is not a closed case. It's a question we have to keep answering.